Greetings, Earthlings. I'm Garry Davis, and I want to talk to you today about something very revolutionary. Actually, it's February 14th that I'm taping this. It's Valentine's Day, so this is my Valentine to the citizens of the world. And it's very important because it involves you as U.S. citizens, and it involves other people throughout the world in terms of our rights. This involves actually an amendment which has been put into the U.S. Constitution way back in 1789. Let me backtrack a little bit. As you know, the U.S. Constitution was formed by 55 men, but before that, the 1776, of course, was the Day of Independence that they declared. The 3 million people on the eastern seaboard, they declared independence from Great Britain. And then the Revolutionary War started. Well, that was finished in 1783. Now, between 1783 and 1787, these 13 states, which now were states by themselves, they had been former colonies of the UK, now they were states, but there was no law between them. It was like a little United Nations. No law between them. They had different currencies. You couldn't get goods from one state to another, etc., etc. It was not working. So there they decided that they had to do something about it, but they didn't tell the 55 men that gathered together in Independence Hall in 1787 rather, what to do. They knew they had to do something, but a remarkable thing happened. These were men of very intelligent. They were legislators in their own states. Some of them were governors, etc., etc. And they decided that one man stood up one day when it started, and he made a motion, which is quite an extraordinary motion, and everything hinges on what he said. He said, "I make a motion that we, these 55 men, constitute ourselves a committee of the whole." And everybody looks at everybody. That's it. Because once they had voted, and they voted unanimously, that now they were going to be a committee of the whole, then they were divorced of whatever instructions they had been given by their particular states. Now they were talking as human beings, not as delegates of a particular state. That's a very interesting point, because this word whole actually is the key of what I want to talk about today. So then from then on, then they could talk in terms of human rights and so forth. Now, what they did when they were discussing the Constitution of the United States, and that's another thing, they were not there sent by their governments to talk about a higher level of government. But now they could. So what were they actually doing? They were exercising what we call today freedom of choice. Freedom of choice. And how did they put that into the Constitution itself? Well, once they had decided where the powers were going, the legislative, the judicial, the executive, and so forth, and what these powers are going to be, they had a problem, because they were a new government, and outside there in the Atlantic Ocean, France, England, and Spain were sitting out there with their men of wars and ready to knock off these states one by one, and maybe the new government itself. They said, we have to make provisions for somebody to represent the state itself. The state, not the people, the state. Because the state is now going to be the embodiment of law, okay? So we have to protect the state. So they said, well, Congress can't do it. The only one that could do it would be the President of the United States. So what did they do? They gave the President of the United States what they call discretionary powers. Discretionary powers? What did that mean? It meant that when he was acting as the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy, he was, in a way, a dictator. He could do what he wanted. He was protecting the state now. Look at the dichotomy here, because they threw off King George III because King George III incorporated all the powers of the state, the legislative, the executive, and so forth, judicial, in one person. And they fought a revolutionary against that. They said, we're the people, and this is a revolution for people. And here they were forced, because of the times, to give one man in that government that they were establishing the power over the people. In other words, to protect the state itself. And that's what they did. In Article 2, Section 2 of the Declaration of the Constitution of the United States, that's what they said. That when the President of the United States is acting as the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy, he is acting in the service of the state. Well, think about that. Where does the Army and the Navy function? Well, obviously, they don't function in a city of the state, of the country itself. They function outside. And why do you need an army outside the framework, the very framework of the state that they're creating? Because there's no law there. And therefore, it's a condition of anarchy. So you need an army and a navy to protect the state itself. Well, Patrick Henry says, wait a minute, you can't do that. He says, you're giving a one-man discretionary powers, you're placing him above the law. Nobody wanted to debate that. He left the Congress. He said, I'm not going to agree to this. He was the only man who walked out. Now, there was a man in that Congress, Madison, James Madison, tremendous Democrat and so forth. He was taking notes the whole time. He said, there's something we got to do. You know, this must be a legal remedy for the citizens now, because when you give the President of the United States dictatorial powers in time of war, and what is our past history in the United States in the century and so forth, then the people themselves are not represented. There has to be a legal remedy. And that's what I'm talking about today. The legal remedy, you see, they had made this Constitution, but they said, how about the people? We need to define the rights of people now. And they said, okay, Madison, you write the Bill of Rights. And he did, Bill of Rights. Now, what did he do? He sat down and he wrote 8 rights. And then he's, as the story goes, at least I think the story is like this, apocryphal. Alexander Hamilton says, well, you've written 8 rights, they're all very well, but you've left out the most important right, James. What do you mean? Well, what did we do 2 years ago? Oh, we started a government. That's right. And what does that right mean? Why did we constitute ourselves a committee of the whole? Because we had to act above our state citizenships. We had to be citizens, de facto citizens of something we were creating, something we were imagining, etc. And that's called freedom of choice. Freedom of choice. You see, you're looking at a guy who made freedom of choice when he was 26 years old. I'm 88 now. I chose to be a citizen of the world. It's an old idea. I don't want to go into that because that's another story. You can read my books. But Madison said, okay, then what we'll do is we won't say that, we won't put that in freedom of choice as such, because, hey, we're just trying to get this government going, okay? And these people up in Maine, they're going to want their own government. And these people who have slaves down in the South, they're going to want their own government. We can't afford that. We're building a new government, etc. So, what did he do? He put the 9th Amendment in. I don't know whether you've ever heard of the 9th Amendment. Very few people have. Because the 9th Amendment doesn't spell out any rights. The 9th Amendment says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. That's what I want to talk about. This is the most revolutionary right which has ever been put in any constitution, and is only in the United States Constitution. Rights retained by the people. What does that mean? That means if you've got them, if they're retained, you got them. And this is before the government is established. That is before citizenship, before state citizenship and national citizenship. These are human rights. and that is embodied in the United States Constitution.